Hello and welcome, if you please, to the Nature Disturbed podcast, a podcast where we discuss football, soccer, and sportsmanship in a very loving and respectful way. Not. This podcast is about the natural world, and today's topic is a big one. If you would like to see some of today's topic in illustrated and animated form, then I encourage you to check out my recent posts at Nature Disturbed on Instagram. This podcast was recorded on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. This episode contains strong language and adult themes. I'll let you know what I'm wearing. I'm wearing a really cute little crop top that says evolution is a conspiracy on it. Yeah, it's ironic. Is it? I'm not sure. I just feel like you can't prove it. That's how I feel. No, I'm being silly, very silly. We're still in the throes of the wet season, so as ever, I'm sat here in my kitchen sink. I felt particularly naughty today, so I made sure that before I got in, I put all of my forks in the sink. So that might explain the clinking. I'll kick off right away with a quote from wordsmith, poet and freethinker Gia Gunn. She's CCC, crazy cuckoo cut. Just got off the boat, you know, little trip from Asia. Just landed like fresh tilapia. Today's topic is tilapia. Well, it's about the family of fish which tilapia belong to, the cichlids. In fact, it's not just about them either. Today's episode uses the lens of cichlids to uncover something much bigger than just them, bigger than all the fish in the ocean. The driving force behind all life as we know it, and the very reason we're all here today. Our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ. Oh, sorry, I had some mustard on my script. I meant to say evolution. Honey. Nothing in life makes sense without looking through the lens of evolution. For example, why do I have nipples? That seems unnecessary. I'm not lactating or anything. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad I have them. Without them, I wouldn't know where to put my nipple tassels. But still, they seem a bit superfluous. Why do I have them? Evolution. I'm sure embryologists would say that male nipples come from the way we develop as embryos. But embryonic development evolved too. It didn't just appear one day. God, I'm so sick of embryologists in my ears. There, you can hear them now. You can hear that, right? And why do peacocks, which live in jungles along with tigers, bears, leopards and wolves, have those absolutely ridiculously gorgeous and obscenely attention-seeking tails? That seems a little risky, doesn't it? Well, also, that's evolution. And why are eyeballs so complicated? Actually, evolution can't explain that one. Gotcha, atheists. Okay, I'm just kidding there. Evolution can explain everything, even the stuff that doesn't make much sense. It's responsible for all the weird forms and behaviours we see around us, and it has a lot of tools up its sleeve. Tricks up its belt, tricks up its... The big one we've all heard of is natural selection. Traits which are likely to increase survival and reproductive success get passed on to the next generation. There's sexual selection, where traits are selected because they are attractive, not necessarily because they help an individual survive. This can lead to some extraordinary things. I'm looking at you, Mr. Peacock. Who remembers the song Peacock by Katy Perry? I try not to, but she has been on my mind a lot lately. There's also genetic drift, which sees random chance slowly but surely shifting the frequency of an existing gene variant or allele in a population. Now, if all this is coming across as a little bit far-fetched and unbelievable, then don't worry. I don't believe in evolution either. But if we were to pander to the rabid evolutionists for just 1 second, what kind of evidence would we find compelling? Is it possible to study evolution in action? Fossil records certainly help. They can show us how bodies have changed over time, but the best tool for uncovering the secrets of evolution is... I'm sorry, this is a word I have a troubled history with, is genetics. I have a hard time with it because I find it hard. How's that for descriptive language? I don't want to instill any doubt in my capabilities as a science communicator, but when I studied biology at uni, I failed one exam, and that was in genetics. But I'm pleased to say that now I love it. I love it so much. I love it so fucking much. But I'm not going to be the one to talk about it. I'll leave that to Dr. Martin Jenner of Bristol University, who looks at evolutionary biology in cichlid fishes. He was also my practical project supervisor back when I studied. For the pleasure of your delicate little eardrums, I took a trip to meet him on the shores of Lake Malawi, which is in... Let me just check Google Maps quickly. It's in... Fuck. I dropped my phone in the sink. Well, I can't remember where it is, but that's where I was, so back to me. Oh, and one more thing. Not to be impersonal, but my name, as far as you're concerned, is Nature Disturbed. So you will hear that I've bleeped over Martin's use of my other name during the interview. I used cat noises in the act of censoring. Hi guys, I just arrived in Kamuzu International Airport in Malawi. Just landed like fresh tilapia. Only a few hundred kilometres walk to get to Martin at Lake Malawi. Lake Malawi is one of the Great Lakes. Not one of those Great Lakes. Sorry Americans. The world is bigger than just y'all, as you'd say. I'm talking about the East African Great Lakes. Y'all. 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 Y'all, y'all, y'all. It's hard to stop now that I've started. I'm sorry, I wouldn't want to ostracize any American listeners out there. Y'all. The East African Great Lakes formed as a result of two continental plates moving apart in the East African Rift Valley, forming huge crevasses extending deep into the Earth's crust. These lakes altogether hold about a quarter of the Earth's unfrozen fresh water. They include Lake Victoria, which is named after Victoria Beckham. Or it's named after Queen Victoria. I know it's one of the two. And there are lakes like Tanganyika, Turkana, and Malawi, my destination. On my journey to Lake Malawi to meet Martin, I had the good fortune of passing through Nkota Wildlife Reserve, one of the country's wildest places. In 2014, after years of poaching, the elephant population had been reduced to just 100 individuals, but over 2016 to 17, over 500 elephants were reintroduced to the area, proudly returning to their rightful home. I love elephants. Seeing as we're on a wet and wild theme, here's a fun fact. Elephants are excellent swimmers. Their long legs make powerful paddles, and they use their trunks like snorkels. A few years ago, the Sri Lankan Navy found two elephants swimming 16 kilometres out at sea. The pair were later rescued and taken back to land. Now that I think about it, that actually makes them sound like bad swimmers. They can't be that good if they needed rescuing. Oh look, an elephant! Wow, it looks really angry. Ah! I'm going to feel that tomorrow. What else should I tell you before I get to Martin? Well, Lake Malawi is the southernmost of the East African Great Lakes, and it's the fourth largest freshwater lake in the world by volume. It has an area of around 30,000 square kilometres. That's about the area of Hawaii. It's also home to more species of fish than any other lake in the world, and that's because of the adaptive radiation of cichlid fishes, which is what I'm here to discuss. An adaptive radiation is defined by Merriam-Webster as evolutionary diversification of a generalized ancestral form with production of a number of adaptively specialized forms. Really, really, who the hell is Merriam-Webster? I'm sorry. Wow, the bush has really opened up, and I've arrived upon the golden shores of a lake which I can't see the other side of. Maybe that's because I'm standing here with my eyes closed. I'll open them. Ah, yes, you can see the other side faintly in the distance. Oh, look, if my eyes don't deceive me, that's Martin over there. Let's see if he can convince me of evolution. I'm going to go through this interview with a very sceptical mindset. It's been 8 long years since we last saw each other. Oh my gosh, I'm welling up. I can't start crying in front of him. Okay, pull it together. Do some heavy breathing. Oh god, that's making it worse. Martin, hello. I've just walked all the way from the airport to meet you here at Lake Malawi. I walked here barefoot. I left my flip-flops at the airport. Thanks for meeting me.
Well, hi. Yeah, it's a shame that you've left your flip-flops behind, but you might need them on these hot and sandy beaches. But very nice to see you. What would you like to talk about?
I had a feeling you would like to talk about fishes today. So that's pretty much on the forefront of my mind. But seeing as it's been a while since we last spoke, I thought I'd prepare a couple of warm-up questions. There's no right or wrong answer. Question one, do you remember me?
So, yes, you're one of my many students. Now, please appreciate that I've had hundreds of students over the years, but I definitely remember you because we were in Costa Rica together. We did a field course, so I was teaching a field course, and I was teaching mainly the fish biology part of it. But you were out there with a group of about 20 odd students, and if I remember rightly, you were working on a group of insects called the katydids.
That is that is a very great level of detail, which I couldn't have expected. So thank you for remembering that. Yeah, God, I hardly remember them. Um, Question two, Martin, you were my practical project supervisor in third year. Why did
Hmm.
you give my partner the first, but you only gave me a 2-1?
Well, I'm sorry about that. I can I can only apologize, but I'm sure you were deserving of a first. But something happened at the very last minute that made you drop the ball. But I can't quite remember what that was.
Yeah, I suppose it's been 8 years. It might be too late to apply for a remark. Well, I'll take it on
Probably.
the chin. So, is it fair to say that you are an evolutionary biologist who uses cichlids as a model organism?
Yeah, so I'm an ecologist and an evolutionary biologist, and so I guess kind of that when people think about evolution, maybe they think that it takes place over extremely long time scales, millions of years, and so on. And it does take place over millions of years, but the whole process of evolution is actually taking place also over what we kind of think of as ecological timescales, so much shorter timescales of just 1 or 2 generations. And so most of my research is focused on that time point, which is between these kind of ecological and these evolutionary timescales. And I focus, yes, on a group of fishes, which are called the cichlids. And cichlids are found throughout the tropics. I mean, you probably know some of them quite well. They include the tilapia, tropical angelfish are also cichlids. So these are quite common now in aquariums. People like to keep them as pets, but they're also very useful as study organisms because of the sheer numbers of them. So, in some parts of the world, in East Africa, in Lake Malawi, in Lake Tanganyika, in Lake Victoria, and also right across the neotropics, there's hundreds and hundreds of species that have evolved over very short periods of evolutionary time. Less than a million years, you can get hundreds of species evolving, and that's really quite exceptional.
Am I right in thinking that Lake Victoria is only 14,000 years old?
Yeah, well, it's actually older, but so Lake Victoria itself is probably in the region of maybe about 500,000 years old, but it's quite a shallow basin. So the other lakes in that area, Lake Tanganyika and Lake Malawi, they're really deep, right? So they're kind of over 700 meters deep, and they're in part of the Rift Valley that's actually kind of separated. So the continental plates are kind of like pulling apart, and they've filled up with water, and so they're really deep. But Lake Victoria is quite different because that's inside like a valley, kind of like a shallow valley between the two kind of big rifts. So at its deepest point, it's like only about 100 meters deep. And what's happened is that over the last 500,000 years, it's dried up and then refilled repeatedly. And so the very last time that it was dry was around 14,000 years. Now, people are really excited about that particular lake because it has in the region of about 500 species of cichlid fishes, and they probably evolved since the refilling event over the last 10,000 years, which means that evolution is taking place at these kind of like crazy rates, like it's evolution on steroids.
It's mental. So is that something that you could describe as an adaptive radiation? That
Yes, well, so that's one of the many adaptive radiations in the world. So we've got many cases where species have kind of radiated into multiple ecologically, anatomically, kind of morphologically, kind of diverse species over short periods of evolutionary time, and that's really what an adaptive radiation is. So some of the world kind of like famous adaptive radiations are in birds, things like the Galapagos finches, the Darwin's finches, yeah. So these are a group of species. I think there's 18 species that are known now, and they evolved within the last million years. And they've all got these kind of like strange beak shapes and so on. And each one of those beak shapes is for a different purpose. Some of the big beaks are crushing these kind of very large seeds, and some of the small beaks are for kind of picking out insects or picking out kind of seeds from very kind of narrow crevices. And so each different type of beak has got a different job. And that's a classic case of adaptive radiation where all of the different species kind of do slightly different things in slightly different ways. And this means that they don't compete with one another so much so that they don't drive one another to extinction. But the same kind of thing is happening in these African lake radiations where we've got, hundreds of species, including many species that are living right on top of one another, all doing slightly different jobs with slightly different morphology. So some of them have got sharp, pointy mouths that are able to pick at invertebrate prey as inside little crevices in the rocks. Others are able to bite chunks out of plants. Some are able to scrape algae and get all the little kind of worms, invertebrates, and so on that are inside that algae. Some of them have got specially adapted jaws, which are able to scrape the scales off other fishes. And some are fin biters, and so their jaws are kind of like sharp, and they've got these fused teeth that mean that they can just go up and go alongside a fish and then kind of bite a chunk out of its tail. Then there are the kind of the big barracuda-like predators which are out there in the open waters, just hunting down prey, chasing them down in shoals and annihilating them. So all of these kind of different types of feeding strategies, all of these different morphologies are there. And of course, like it's not just it's like in their anatomy that they've changed, but also in their color patterns and their breeding behaviors. It's all there so that they can maximize the opportunities that are available whilst trying to avoid competition, extinction with all of these other species that are there.
so these species are able to evolve in the same place. I think there's an idea which kind of exists in my mind that you need something like a mountain range separating individuals so that they can't, cross their genes, but that's
Yeah.
not happening here.
No, that's so yeah, it's a really old idea. It kind of goes back to really the time of Darwin, and that speciation requires some kind of barrier to form between or like one a population, so it splits into two. So yeah, you can think about a mountain range kind of splitting two populations of bird, and those then kind of go in their own directions, evolution by something called genetic drift, or by selection, and by the adapting to those different local habitats means that the two populations separate, and then they're apart for maybe 1 million years. And then, should they ever come back together, then they don't recognize one another as the same species anymore. Right, and that's the classic idea. That's the kind of thing that happens. Can you like imagine an individual bird colonizing an island, becomes separated from its ancestral population? That kind of stuff happens all the time. And that is like one of the ways that speciation takes place. And that's kind of the dominant thinking for, well, probably in the region of about 60 or 70 years, was that that was how speciation took place. But around 1950s, right the way through up to the 1990s, there was a kind of an idea in the minds of evolutionary biologists that actually speciation could take place in the same place. So you could have a species evolving right alongside another one simply because it's doing something slightly different. And that selection kind of then is able to pull them apart. Even if they share their genes from time to time, selection is sufficiently strong to pull them apart. And so they do become isolated. And this idea was tested, if you like, kind of by some theoretical models that came out kind of in the early 2000s, and it was shown to be kind of possible. But one of the big challenges there was actually finding places and examples where it actually has taken place. So the main problem is that if you have two species in the same place, how do you know that they haven't simply evolved apart somewhere else and come back together? So what you really kind of need to do is to be able to find two populations in the same place that can't possibly have ever been anywhere else except in that place. And this is where cichlid fishes kind of have come in, because inside some crater lakes in Nicaragua and in East Africa, and indeed some in West Africa as well, you get radiations of cichlid fishes. So you get multiple species which are each other's closest relatives that are quite distinct from all of the cichlid fishes outside of those lakes. So when people started to look at these in detail and started to look at their genes, and they started to kind of look to see, kind of whether they've ever been separated from one another, like geographically, like for example, whether kind of one population colonized the Greater Lake first, and then another population came second, and they didn't recognize one another. That they tested those kind of ideas, and they showed that actually kind of that didn't happen. That really the speciation took place inside these isolated crater lakes. So these crater lakes kind of formed via different mechanisms. Like some of them are volcanic, so kind of like a volcano erupts, and then that volcano dies, and then it fills up with water, and then somehow fish get in. We don't know how they get in. Perhaps
Miracle.
they, well, I mean, no idea how they get in, but some people just think that they kind of like that sometimes there's just connections via rivers that disappear. Other people think that maybe they kind of get carried in by birds. So you can imagine things like pelicans and storks and things maybe carrying a fish and then accidentally dropping it. I wonder whether water spouts are able to do it from time to time. Like you hear these kind of stories that the fish dropping on kind of American cities being carried by storms.
Raining fish, yeah.
raining fish, raining frogs, that kind of stuff. Maybe that sort of thing happens anyway. They certainly get into these crater lakes and then they start to diverge. So we've been working on a few of these cases. One of the ones we discovered was I think it was back in 2011. We went along to a small crater lake just to the north of Lake Malawi called Lake Masoko. It's high up in the mountains, and there's some rivers kind of like flowing around it, but they're separate from this crater lake. And inside there, there's two species. There's one that lives in the shallow water, and then there's another one that lives in deeper water. And the shallow water one has got yellow males, and the deep water one has got blue males. And the thing about cichlid fish is that females really like to choose males on the basis of their color patterns. And here we've got this situation where they're actually kind of two with very different color patterns that actually are genetically distinct from one another. We sequenced their genomes and we found that they're really distinct, but they've only been separated for 1,000 years. So this is just a few hundred generations. Within the last 1,000 years, we've got the evolution of these two forms. Now, in that case, that particular case, they're actually still breeding with one another from time to time. But the hybrids have got low fitness. They don't seem to grow very well. And that's probably because they also are not able to eat the food resources very efficiently because the shallow water ones are primarily feeding upon these benthic invertebrates, things like dragonfly larvae and amphipods and so on that are all kind of like living inside, and shrimps and so on that are like living inside the sediments in the shallow water. But the deep water ones are actually feeding upon zooplankton. And so in the daytime, all the zooplankton is down at the bottom of the lake, and that's what they're feeding on. So they're feeding on different things, and they've got different mouth parts, different mouth structures that enable them to feed on those different things. So if you're a hybrid and you've actually kind of got something, a mouth structure that's somewhere in the middle, then naturally you're not very good at feeding on either of those. And so they grow slowly. They don't tend to breed very well, and they, as a consequence, die out. And that's what keeps these two populations apart. So that's one of the cases. And we're looking at another one, which is in another crater lake, which is really close to that. It's called Lake Kingiri. And in that case, we've got two pelagic cichlids. So these are open water species. One of them is quite big. It's about the length of your forearm. The other one is a little tiny thing, the size of your finger. And we've just sequenced their genome, and we found that these actually diverged 2,000 years ago. But these are fully reproductively isolated. And these are so bizarre now that actually kind of there's such difference in size that they certainly wouldn't recognize one another as mates. I mean, you could imagine the big one, if it got kind of presented with a small female, would just eat it. And then if you take the small one and then try and present that as a mate to the big one, the small one would just be scared shitless. It would run.
Mm.
So we've got kind of like speciation taking place really quickly on these kind of ecological predator-prey relationships as well, which is really quite unusual. So it's not just about breeding colors, but it's also about where you eat and what you eat. And that's the kind of the thing that drives these species apart. And they do it really fast.
Is there something about cichlids that makes them predisposed to being able to diverge so quickly? I imagine if you were to put a bunch of people in a in an isolated crater for 1,000 years, the same thing wouldn't happen.
No, there's a few things about them. Um, so not all cichlids diversify very quickly. Indeed, most fish tend to kind of diversify relatively slowly, right? So there's somewhere in the region of about 30,000 species of bony fishes, and cichlids make up in the region of about kind of 5%, 10% of those, if we count all of the ones that are not described and all the rest of it. So cichlids are kind of quite special. But there are these things that people think about that may be helping the radiation. So one of them is that cichlids have got quite malleable mouth parts. They've actually not only got a set of teeth like ours in their oral teeth, but they've also got a second set of teeth deep inside their jaws. Right? So these have evolved from gill rakers that have become kind of modified by evolution, by selection to help in food processing. And so the oral jaws are used for capturing the prey, whilst the pharyngeal jaws are used for processing the prey. And it's thought that maybe this separation has enabled cichlids to kind of diversify in the way that they catch fish and invertebrates and eat algae and do all of those kind of jobs that would never have been possible if they only had one set of jaws, because that set of jaws would have to not only capture the prey but also process it, a bit like ours. So perhaps this second set of jaws, the so-called pharyngeal jaw, has something to do with it. Now, the problem is with that is that lots of other groups of fishes have got pharyngeal jaws that haven't diversified anywhere near as much as that. There's a group of fishes in North America called the surf perches, the wrasses. The evolution of the pharyngeal jaw alone doesn't seem to be a trigger for rapid evolution. So another possibility is that cichlids have evolved so quickly because they do something called hybridization. They tend to mate with the wrong species quite a lot. So we can look at their genomes and we can see that over evolutionary time, they've actually been kind of mating with the wrong species from time to time. And what happens then is that you get kind of injections of genetic material that are potentially useful. So, although kind of in most cases a hybrid is going to die, just once in a while it survives and it injects genetic material which is then used. So, if you've got an opportunity to diversify, what you need is the genetic material that enables you to do it. And it's possible that this hybridization that appears to be rampant in cichlid radiations is just one of the ways that is promoted. It provides essentially kind of a substrate for adaptive radiation to take place for natural selection to operate on. So those are a couple of ideas. But I mean, probably kind of the main reason that these have diversified is that they're really kind of good at taking opportunity when it arises. So if you have a dry lake, then that fills up, then all of the fish from the nearby rivers are going to start to colonize that lake. But it's only cichlids that are diversified. All the rest just kind of like stay pretty much as they are, as just river fishes, they just stay in the margins of the lake doing kind of like river fish type things. But cichlids are the ones that are able to kind of diversify rapidly. They're able to kind of take the ecological opportunity, so it's called, when that arises. And that's likely to be because they just happen to have the right kind of genetic machinery that enables them to do it. They can adapt at the drop of a hat, whilst everything else is kind of stuck in their relatively slowly evolving niches.
So there's a few things working together there then.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And that's quite commonplace in these adaptive radiations, like the Darwin's finches and things like the anolis lizards. That's another group that have diversified extremely rapidly, about 400 odd species in relatively short period of evolutionary time. Hmm.
When you say that there's probably something in their genetic makeup that allows them to go wild with evolution, are they prone to more common mutations or no?
Well, there doesn't seem to be any clear evidence that we have elevated mutation rates within cichlid fishes as opposed to other groups of fishes. But they do have quite unusual aspects to their genomes. And this is an area of research that's really quite unclear, but kind of ongoing at the moment. There's a set of genetic traits that enable species to evolve quite quickly. So there's things like transposable elements. So these are so-called jumping genes. And if these evolve quite quickly, and jump around the genome, then they can turn genes on and off quite quickly. And if you've got selection operating on those, then in principle, then you can get relatively rapid evolution. So some of the most kind of famous cases of traits in evolution are linked to these jumping genes. So the peppered moth is one case. There's black form, and then there's this kind of marbled, kind of grey form. And that color polymorphism within the species is driven by a jumping gene. Now, cichlids have got jumping genes all over their bodies, but so do we, right? So do humans. They're really, really common, these transposable elements. So it's possible that that sort of thing is involved. One of the other things that people are looking into is the possibility that there's a lot of epigenetic factors involved in cichlid speciation as well, so that cichlids are able to kind of rapidly change which genes are turned on and which ones are turned off on the basis of their environment via that environment affecting something called DNA methylation. And DNA methylation is quite important because it's able to silence genes, or if that methylation disappears, then they turn on again. And if you've got a very close link between the environment and the methylation, then in principle, then you can get kind of rapid change. So these are areas of active research, and it's quite possible that those are kind of exceptional in cichlid fishes, but we really kind of don't know that much about them yet.
So, okay, so these processes have resulted in, from what I gather, some really quite unusual, through a human perspective, cichlids. So you already mentioned the scale-eating cichlid. I don't know if they're different species or different morphs of the same species, and they've got asymmetric heads. That's
Yeah,
weird.
this is a group of quite bizarre species that are found in Lake Tanganyika, and they specialize on eating the scales of other cichlid fishes. And the way they do this is that they pretend to be in the shoal of the species. They're effectively kind of mimics, and they kind of like cruise along in the shoal, and then they'll quickly kind of dive in, and then they'll just tear off a strip of scales from the side of their prey. And there are lefties and there are righties. If you're a righty, then you'll kind of rip off the left side of your prey fish and vice versa. And I don't know yet, actually, kind of to what extent that is genetically determined. I would expect that there's a genetic determination there. But as I understand it, it's frequency dependent. So you end up having, if you've got too many lefties, then a righty will be beneficial because the prey fish won't be looking out for that one. And so in some ways, kind of the numbers become balanced of lefties and righties within the population.
Very, very cool. There are a few other weird ones as well. I wonder if you could tell me about some of your favorites. Do you have a favorite
Yeah, I mean,
cichlid?
well, I'm quite keen on some of the bower building cichlids. So these are quite kind of special things that you actually kind of get them in Lake Tanganyika, and you get them in Lake Malawi. They're quite distantly related, but they do the same thing. So this is one of the kind of the odd things about evolution, is that you end up having the same solutions to the same problems evolving multiple times. And cichlids are quite kind of famous for doing this. They will take opportunities at the drop of a hat to go and evolve traits. But those same traits are just kind of evolving in different lakes at this exactly the same time, completely independently, and often with different genes involved. But yes, I really like the bower building cichlids. These are a group of species that are present on sand or other kind of soft substrates, but mainly sand. And the males during the breeding season all get together and they form leks. These leks are aggregations of males where they're all kind of trying to show off to one another. So they're very brightly colored, the males. They are displaying to one another. And whilst they're doing that, they're also building up their bowers. And so what these are sand castles. And the males will grab a mouthful of sand they'll go and swim up into the water column and then they'll drop it. This ends up with a tower of sand. And then once they've got their tower of sand, then they'll start to kind of modify it. So they have a nice flat area on the top. Some of them have little hollows, little cone-like hollows in the middle. Every species has got a slightly different type of bower. Some of them are quite ornate in that they'll be kind of like one big bower in the middle and then sort of smaller bowers around them. But the males are building these and then maintaining them because there's snails that are kind of breaking them down and whatever. And so they're trying to pick up the snails and throw them out and make sure that the waves and so on don't break them down. And all this time, the males are on the lookout for females because that's why they're doing it. They're getting together and they're showing off to one another so that the females can then come along and select the male that they actually want to mate with. But females are quite choosy and they tend to pick the males that have the best combinations of traits. So they like the ones that maybe have the longest fins and the brightest colors. But also these bowers seem to be important in that if a bower is all messy and horrible and been built in the wrong place, then maybe that one's not going to be favored. But if it's kind of nice and pristine and quite tall and so on, then maybe the females will pick that one. So the females will come along and they will then decide which male that they want to mate with, and they'll go through this kind of elaborate little courtship ritual where the males will do a little dance, and then the females will um, follow that male, and then the female will lay some eggs, and the male will then fertilize those eggs by kind of doing a little jig over them and releasing their sperm, and then the females will then pick them up, and then the females will shoot off somewhere else and gather in little groups and brood those eggs. So the males don't actually do any parental care. The whole point of the lek is so that males are able to fight with one another and display with one another and demonstrate how good their genes are so that the females ultimately can make this choice. So you would think that given all of this massive investment that males are putting in during the breeding season, that they would be quite happy to see a female, wouldn't you? So they would be kind of more than delighted and that they would give that female pretty much all the attention that
You'd
she
think
deserves.
so.
But it doesn't actually work that way because we spend quite a lot of time looking at these and trying to figure out how females actually behave on these leks. So you can go, if you can dive inside Lake Malawi, these leks are often quite shallow, only like about 5 meters depth or something. So you can just go and sit there on the bottom and you can watch all of the behaviors. And you see that the males with other males, they also look around and see if there's any egg predators there, because there are some cichlid fishes which are specialized egg predators that will, if a female's releasing some eggs, they'll dive in and they'll start eating them. So those are not favored, so they'll be chased away as well. And so when a female comes along and she starts showing interest in a male, then she'll settle on this bower and watch the male, and that male will be courting her, but then he'll go off and fight with another male, and then he'll come back and then he'll start courting her again. But sometimes the males get so obsessed with fighting the other males, they'll just go off, they'll fight, and then they'll go and see another male and they'll fight, and they might even kind of like swim 5 or 10 meters away to go for another fight. And of course, the female's sitting here going, right, I'm ready to mate. You're a pretty good male. When you come back, I'll mate. But he doesn't come back. He's too busy fighting. And then the female eventually just gives up and leaves and goes to a completely different male. And so a huge amount of effort. The whole point in being there is just forgotten because the males are just so aggressive. They're absolutely bonkers when you see this happening because you know that that male has just lost out on one of his key objectives, which is to have some babies in the next generation.
Yeah, gosh, mixed priorities there. There feels almost something human about it. What you described just then is how I imagine straight clubs and bars. I don't know if you can comment on that or not.
Well, it is a bit like this in that when people think about sexual selection in the natural world, it's often kind of assumed that females are selecting males, right? So think about kind of maybe peacocks, right? So male peacocks with all of these kind of fantastic feathers that they're showing off, and the rather drab females are kind of like strutting around. Maybe they'll kind of like pick that male, maybe they'll pick that male, and so on. And kind of that's the way that sexual selection is kind of like often interpreted in by us. But actually, kind of what really happens is that the males are demonstrating to one another that they are the boss, and it's the top male which then gets to mate with the females. So it's the males themselves that often, not exclusively, but often are the key determinant of who the males actually get to, or who the females get to mate with, which males that they get to mate with. So you could have, if you were to transfer this to your nightclub, then you could imagine kind of like all of the males there, kind of like strutting their stuff on the dance floor. Maybe they would get into a big fight, and then at the end of the night, there would be kind of like three or four fairly kind of like beaten and bruised but dominant males, and then they're the ones that the girls go home with at the end of the evening.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah, different to heaven then.
Indeed.
Um, but one other particularly strange cichlid that I found in my brushing up on uni work was one which knocks the babies out of another cichlid's mouth. Do you know about
Oh
that one?
yes, well, yeah. So these are there's a group of these, and they're quite unusual looking fishes in that they have an upturned jaw, and people think that these are baby eating fishes, pedophages they're called, right?
Cool.
And the most of the evidence for that comes from just looking inside their stomach contents, and there you'll see baby fishes and eggs, but they tend to be quite rare, these species. But the general idea is, yes, that they're a brooding female. So she's been to the lek, she's got this mouthful of eggs, and she's swimming along, and then one of these pedophages will then kind of go up and ram her in the chin, which causes her to spit out some of those eggs and fry. And
Mm,
then that pedophage will then kind of mop them up.
they should be locked up.
Indeed. And they're not baby eating fishes are not really kind of that nice, but actually quite that's quite common in fishes. I mean, most fishes are actually cannibals.
Yeah, oh yeah. I suppose it's wrong to view them through a human lens as well, isn't it? Um, I heard about somebody reference hypertrophied lips. Those are the big lips in these
Hmm.
cichlids I think you mentioned. Um,
Yeah,
I think there was a study referred to as the Angelina Jolie project. Did you hear about that one?
probably a good name for them, but
Yeah,
yeah. All right. So well, yeah, these are fishes that again, this is a classic case of convergent evolution. So the same trait evolving in different places from the same background, if you like. So there are species with these lips inside Lake Victoria. There are species in Nicaragua. There are species in Lake Malawi, Lake Tanganyika, and all evolved independently. But the idea is that if you've got a big set of lips, then in principle you can feed in very small crevices by suction feeding. So fishes feed in different ways, right? So there are some species that will kind of like chase down their prey. They're ram feeders. But most fishes are suction feeders in one way or another. And so what they do is then they basically kind of open their mouth up, but they also open up their gills. And when they open up their gills, they generate a suction into their mouth. And so this is kind of like if a species is feeding on zooplankton and it doesn't tend to kind of like chase the zooplankton, it'll just open up its mouth and then the zooplankton is sucked in. And then it'll close its mouth, put it into its esophagus, down into its stomach, and then go on to eat the next one. So if you've got suction feeding going on, then ideally what you would do is to if you're feeding on species which are kind of deep inside crevices, like think of something like worms that are in the crevices, or maybe some kind of small shrimps and so on, go along to that crevice, make a tight seal, and then open up the operculum, the gill covers, generate that suction, and then you can pull that prey right into your mouth. That's the idea. And I mean, it seems to work. It seems to be quite effective, and it's evolved multiple times. There's a set of genes which have been identified that cause it. So yes, I mean, big lips, a novel feeding strategy is what cichlids do.
So, is genetics the main tool that you use to figure out what's going on with cichlids? Is it, I guess it's probably a combination of observing their behavior and then applying genetics.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these days, most of the work that's going on has got a genetic element to it, partly because we're now able to sequence their whole genomes, and kind of just in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, we've been able to put a fair bit of effort into collecting specimens that have had their whole genomes sequenced. And that means that we can really kind of start to pin down which genes are responsible for particular traits. So if we're interested in big lips, then we can compare a big lip species and a closely related small lip species and see which genes are being differentially expressed. So which genes are operational inside those lips. And that gives us kind of a list of genes that we can then start to investigate in more detail. And one of the aspects of research I'm not personally involved in, but some of my colleagues are, is to actually genetically manipulate fish, so cichlids, and change their genes and have a look at what phenotypes, what morphological structures actually kind of start to appear. So you could take, in principle, a gene which has been identified for a big lip, and then you could make some switches in that are responsible for the big lips in a small lip species, and look to see if you get a big lip form appearing. And if it does, then you can be pretty confident that you've actually identified the gene that's responsible. And people kind of like do this not just because it's kind of interesting and kind of can we do it, but actually to get a kind of a better understanding on this adaptive evolution process. Because if we can show that it kind of like happens in one like bizarre phenotype like the big lips, then we can actually kind of start to kind of infer what's happening more generally for all of the other traits, which are a bit more kind of like difficult to study, things like body size and patterning and head shape and so on, which are all controlled by hundreds, if not thousands, of genes operating in synchrony.
I hope that the designer baby market don't get their hands on this big lip gene.
Well, yes. I don't know whether it's in people or not. It probably is, because that's one of the weird things about developmental biology is that most of the genes that we're studying are actually well known because they've been studied in other groups of vertebrates, including mammals and humans.
Wow. Okay. Maybe I do hope. Maybe I do hope that becomes a thing in humans. Um, we'll have to wait
Yeah.
and see. So, yeah, I don't want to be rude, but my feet are getting a bit hot. So I'm going to go back to the airport and get my flip-flops. Thanks for meeting me. It's been really interesting, Martin.
Yeah. Well, also, thanks for the chat. So I hope you have a safe journey back, and I'm just gonna sit here on the beach and drown my sorrows now that you're leaving with a coochie coochie.
Here I am, back in my sink again, wearing my ironic crop top. Martin went on to explain that a coochie coochie is in fact a type of beer from Malawi. Wow, wasn't that an emotional roller coaster? At first I thought he wasn't going to remember me. Then he did. I feel like he said something about fish evolution in the midst of praising me as one of his best students ever. And I'll be honest, that kind of flattery is evidence enough of evolution for me, Thank you so much, Martin, for your time and for the fascinating insight into the wonderful world of cichlids. Thank you, as ever, to Damon Macmillan for the music, and thank you for listening. I do hope today was nice for yourself. And I'll end with a celebratory poem about those miraculous fish. There is a great lake in East Africa, where one fish rules out over all. These fishes called cichlids make evolutionary quick bids to evolve, outcompete, and to sprawl. Not so long ago, there was but one type, a cichlid who then had the gall to adjust to his settings without losing time, adding genes it saw fit to install. Now the lake here in question is Malawi, about 4,000 miles southeast of Senegal. It's a lake where fishermen use lines in the north half. In the southern half, the fishermen trawl. Over 800 cichlids inhabit these depths, well, 860 overall. They display a remarkable diversity. Some grow thin, some grow wide, some grow tall. The number of species keeps growing, and it seemingly won't hit a wall. There are cichlids who speed through the water. There are others that pretty much crawl. There are some which look scary, and some which look scared, even more so than Shelley Duvall. There's a cichlid who builds his own palace, with a lawn and a moat and a wall, who forgets his intentions of attracting a mate, and instead he begins a mass brawl. The variety of cichlids today can be traced to the ancestor who once got the ball, rolling in creation and adaptive radiation. Now that fish made a very good call.